Hello, everyone. Welcome to Angular Athens, which is now hosting Angular World Tour. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Angular Athens, which is now World Tour. Hello, everyone. I think there's an echo. Angular Athens, which is
I think we're good now.
Okay.
You had a shadow.
Perfect. But I will not say hello everyone again because we've already heard it 3 times. So today we're hosting Angular World Tour, and more about Angular World Tour. Tracy, Emma, and Deborah will talk to you more about that. But before I do introductions to our guests today, let me tell you a few quick words about the Angular Athens meetup. Tracy, can you share my screen? Can you see it?
There we go, shared.
Okay, perfect. So welcome to Angular Athens meetup. This meetup was initiated 4 years ago by Stefanos and myself, and then more people joined like Aris, Fanis, Yanis, Lena, and George. Hi, everyone. And our main goals in this meetup is to enhance the Angular community in Athens, in Greece, to also exchange knowledge about Angular, to collaborate and help each other, of course, and networking. And for all of these things, of course, we have our meetups, which usually we try to do them every 2 or 3 months. When COVID was not here, we did them in person. Now we try to do them online. But we also have our Slack workspace where we exchange questions about Angular, we do job ads, we also chat about tech or not related things. So if you want everyone, join our Slack workspace. We also have our meetup page, of course, where you can see all our upcoming events. We also have a LinkedIn group, and you can take a screenshot if you want. And we also have our Twitter, of course. Follow us at Athens Angular. And you can follow us on Instagram as well at Angular Athens. And every Thursday at 6 p.m., we do office hours. You can hang out with us. We usually post it on our Twitter as well. So if you don't get a chance to copy this link now, if you follow us on Twitter at Athens Angular, you will see this link or join the Slack workspace. And if we're always looking for new speakers, so you can scan this QR code or go on this bit.ly and submit your talk, and we would love to see you. Thank you very much. Also, at this point, I would like to show you Aris Bambakos, a member of the organizing team of Angular Athens, wrote this Angular book, Angular Project. So if you want to go online and buy it, you can use this code Athens 2021 Aris to get 25% off. And yeah, that's it for me. So you can stop sharing my screen, Tracy. Thank you. And yes, so now let me introduce our panel today. We have Tracy Lee. Tracy, you want to say a few words?
Hi, nice to see everybody. So excited to be speaking at Angular Athens, and thank you so much, Katerina, for hosting us.
Thank you for coming to Athens for this amazing world tour. And we hope next time to have you actually in person, to do an actual world tour in person. And we also have Deborah Kurata.
Hey.
Would you like to say a few things about yourself, or maybe later? Okay, maybe later during your talk. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a bit awkward now. And we also have Emma Twerske with her cat. So, okay, so should we begin with our talks today?
Sounds great. Oh, Emma, you're muted, by the way.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was just saying, I think I'm up first, question mark? Yeah, let's do this. Okay, cool. Yeah, so as introduced, I'm so excited to be on this panel and at the first ever meetup of all women speakers. I think that's flippin' awesome. I'm also super excited to be here at Angular Athens. I love Greece. We were just talking in the green room about how amazing Greece is. So hopefully one day we will be doing this in person. But until then, my name is Emma Twerske, and I am on the Angular team at Google. I use the pronouns she, her. And today we're going to be talking about the state of Angular and sort of what's new with Angular from the Angular team perspective. So the Angular team has had a really great time in the last year, sort of revisiting and taking the time to, we're not traveling, but like revisit what our core values are. And at our core, we love Angular, and what we're focused on is creating apps developers love to build, and doing that by creating apps users love to use. And creating a community where everyone feels welcome. So this is obviously part of that, but just making sure that the Angular community is welcoming, that we're reaching out, and that we're really working on building a strong community. And so when we use that word community, I think it's important to revisit what that actually looks like and what that means. We use the word a lot, but I just joined the team a year ago and I was like, okay, what is this like Angular community? Well, at its core, it's people that use Angular, and there are quite a lot of those people. In the last couple of years, we saw that NPM downloads went from about 1.4 million to 2.6 million weekly downloads. And obviously, this doesn't include anything like private registries. So for example, Bitbucket or Google, who is a huge consumer and user of Angular, actually has a private clone of Angular internally. And so that wouldn't go through NPM. So that's, I don't know, another couple million, probably not, but something in the large size. And beyond that, on GitHub, we have seen over 1.8 million projects using Angular. And again, this is just public repositories and public projects, and doesn't include things like most enterprise applications, obviously aren't going to be public, anything that's not on GitHub. So again, anything at Google, but still there's 1.8 million projects. I love to look through source code and see how people are using applications all the time. So a super cool way to sort of search how Angular is being used. Now, I've mentioned Google a few times in there. So what about Angular at Google? Obviously, it's not included in any of those stats. So we want to give a peek into what that actually looks like. So Angular developers at Google, there are thousands of people authoring Angular code monthly. And we're teaching about 1,000 engineers per year who are new to Angular. So that means that we're currently onboarding about 1,000 new engineers into the Angular ecosystem at Google. That means that we have about over 2,700 Angular applications within Google, which is almost double from what it was 5 years ago. So really, there's been a ton of growth in the Angular ecosystem of people choosing to develop enterprise applications in Angular at Google. Some more stats about that is it's all Ivy as of about earlier this year. And when you think about what those Angular applications are, I just want to take a minute to think about what they are. So obviously there's things like Google Cloud, things you're familiar with, like if you ever use Firebase Console, all of these really great public apps. But even internally, the entire code editing process or engineer process for developing is in Angular. So even if a Google developer isn't writing Angular code, they're doing all of that in a code editor that's within the browser that's Angular. So even if you're writing, let's say like Python or Android, source code application work, you're writing that in an Angular application. Then when you go to open the equivalent of a PR, you're doing that in a sort of GitHub-esque process that is also Angular. And then when you go to do code reviews, that's also in Angular. And then when you go to do any of the CI process, that's another Angular application. So basically any code written at Google is touching Angular at some point in its journey. So it's really core to the Google experience, which I think is pretty cool. Now outside of Google, there is a lot of Angular happening, more so even, and we're open source first, and we're contributor first. So just in version 12, which was the last major version we published, there were some really great community contributions. These were PRs that made it into that major release, things like min-max form validators, all kinds of community contributions not developed by the core team, but supported and that went through our PR process and made it in. So some really cool stuff that landed with NG Zone, HTTP client, all kinds of really cool stuff. And I think this is what we mostly think of when we think of being a community contributor, but there are a ton more ways to contribute. So when we say we love community contributions, I want to challenge what we mean by that. You don't have to ever look at the Angular source code to be in the Angular community. If you want to, that's super cool. We would love to support you in that. So the most common thing you think of when you think of being an Angular community member, maybe the misconception is that you're submitting pull requests. Obviously, the Angular team pays people to do this. Obviously, this is how Angular continues to push out new features. This is how we publish new versions. But there's so many more things than this, right? So GitHub has other features. There's the whole section of issues and feature requests. We actually recently redid our issues and feature request templates on all of our repositories. So it's very clear. So when you say, hey, I ran into this issue because there's 2 million people out there using Angular, more than that, and you're hitting weird edge cases that we absolutely are not running into, we want to know about them and we want to see them, or maybe you have a really good idea for a new feature. The best way to do that is to open a GitHub issue so that you can interact with our team and we can think about what it's doing. Now that Ivy's gone, we've really sat back and said, okay, or now that Ivy is here, we've really sat back and said, okay, so what next? What cool things do we want? And a lot of what's driving those conversations is looking at what the community's opening issues for and thinking about for future features. You can also just comment on issues. Let's say the issue that you run into already exists, but in a slightly different way. That's also super useful. Participate in RFCs or request for comment. We are running approximately one a month at this point, and an RFC is a GitHub issue we put out that says, hey, we're thinking about maybe doing this thing. What do you think about it? Do you hate it or do you love it? A really good example of that is in version 13, sneak peek, we will be removing IE11 support. And that first came from an RFC where we wanted to check the pulse of the community and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this thing. How would it impact you? And the conversation around that sort of set the timeline for when we felt comfortable and when the community sort of felt comfortable with that happening. So RFCs are a really great way to participate and be a contributor. And then also we're always running surveys. Follow us on Twitter. This is a subtle plug to check out. Right now we're doing a lot of stuff with micro front ends and doing community interviews there, but we're always looking for pulses. We should have a pretty large developer survey coming out in the next month. And that one is super, super important for people to fill out. So definitely go follow us and check out for when that comes out. So just some examples of requests for comments. Like I said, about one a month. I'm not lying. There's a lot out there. Here's an example of some survey feedback. So they definitely exist. And here's the link if you're interested in the feature request process of how opening a feature request actually works. Okay, so I've talked about version 12 a little bit. I just want to highlight some of the stuff. I'm super excited because I'm about to change these slides to version 13. But until then, Some really cool stuff, nullish coalescing. If you go to the Angular YouTube, again, a subtle plug, there's a whole video on nullish coalescing. But essentially what it is a way to actually simplify the syntax in your templates. So something like this becomes something like this. You're saving lines of code. You're saving the redundancy of checking if something's null and undefined. So a really great add there. Inline Sass, this is one I was really excited about. So if you are somebody that subscribes to the single file component structure, we're not going to open that debate right now. But let's say you have a single line of Sass you need to add to a component. You can now do that in Sass inline in your component. So I think that's just another really cool add. Let's see, ng build is now prod by default. So instead of having to run ng build and then specify that it's a prod build, we found that like 95% of developers running ng build wanted it to be a prod build by default. And especially for new developers, it was maybe another thing you had to remember to do to specify that prod flag. And so people were accidentally, especially newer in their developer journey, pushing developer builds to production environments, which is not so great. So making ng build prod by default was trying to help meet developers where they're at and make the developing experience just a little bit easier. It also makes it much easier to fit in with other types of ways to deploy your application or host them. So things like Firebase and stuff like that, this really helped out with. There's a way to migrate. Let's see. And then strict mode. So strict mode by default came with V12. And again, this was something where we really wanted to help developers develop better apps and higher quality apps earlier on. So strict mode is a way to, in your templates, ensure that you're following TypeScript best practices, that you're declaring types. And so the idea here is that if you run into an error earlier in your developer journey, it's a little bit more frustrating because you wrote some code and it just didn't work. But that means that later down the line, when you're in your production application and you've run your ng build prod by default, and it's out there and you have your Sass inline template or inline in your component, that it doesn't fail later. So we're reducing production errors by a pretty significant margin by making things stricter up front. And that goes with the idea of being tightly coupled with TypeScript. If you're interested more in what strict mode is, there is a great blog post with a link on the screen. Feel free to pause the video if you're watching this back and want to see these, or I can send all the links later. More updates, Webpack 5 is prod ready. Version 13, we'll see a little bit more with the webpacking there. Again, this is really great if you're looking for that micro front ends. I just spaced on that word. And you're looking for micro front end architectures. Webpack 5 was a really big step in that process. TypeScript 4.2. Version 13 will actually be TypeScript 4.3 or 4.4, depending on their release. The Ivy-based language service, Angular dev tools, all kinds of cool stuff in there. Keep an eye out. Version 13 will be just as exciting. If you're interested in the language service, again, here's a link for that. And so I've mentioned Ivy a little bit, but version 12 was also where we started with Ivy everywhere. So under the hood, the legacy engine of Angular was using this old rendering and compilation pipeline called View Engine. Maybe you've heard about it. This is Angular meetup. But in order to evolve and grow, we realized that we needed to push that boundary and create a new rendering engine, and that's what we've called Ivy. So Ivy was enabled for all new projects in version 9, but we've wanted to make sure we didn't leave any of the community behind. So we've maintained compatibility, and in order to do that, we've used ngCC, which has allowed us to compile View Engine libraries so that they work with Ivy applications. Starting version 13, we are fully on Ivy, and ngCC is fully gone. It is deprecated, not removed, but that means that all of your applications, once you've migrated to Ivy, are fully running on Ivy, which is pretty significant. So View Engine is now deprecated, and there's a great blog post on this. If you're interested in sort of the metrics behind this, I can tell you that within Google, we have, with the Ivy flag, I think the Google Cloud is by far the biggest Angular application at Google. And I was talking to an engineer at Google Cloud, and he said that with the flip to Ivy, they saved the equivalent of 15 engineers full-time build time. So basically that means that 15 engineers now have full time to work on other things because they're no longer just sitting waiting for their Angular applications to build, or it's the equivalent of 15 full-time engineers. So that is a pretty significant build time reduction. We've also seen a 90% computing space decrease and some really great other metrics that we'll be sharing soon. So this is a pretty significant win in all regards. Now, with that, Ivy's gone, and so that means that we have space to talk about what the future of Angular is. So in 2021, we released Angular DevTools. That's a new way to debug your applications. If you haven't downloaded it, please go check it out. It is a very cool new feature and way if you're looking to debug or profile and build more performant applications. We have created streamlined release cycles. There's all kinds of other cool stuff in that. Again, that build speed and bundle size decrease is like pretty cool. If you're interested in DevTools, there's that. And again, that was just all in the major. So I want to highlight that like minor releases I think are cooler. In general, minor releases are where things land that aren't breaking changes because most things aren't. But maybe didn't make it into that release as a major. So for example, ES build has reduced the build time by 20%. And actually in version 13, that'll be another 10% because of the removal of some additional steps there. RxJS 7 came in there. Let's see, better templating and autocomplete. So again, that Ivy language service is just continuing to get better. That was actually a project that was a community contribution that our team partnered with on new APIs and forums and all kinds of other cool stuff. Like, again, we're continuing to work on clear error messaging. This was an intern project, but if you're familiar with the banana in a box problem, starting version 12.2, this is alone a reason to update. But any banana in a box errors with the two-way binding target issue have like, it went from a one sentence error that was like, hey, this is not working to like a page long error that explains exactly what you need to do to fix it. It's like my favorite little like thing that made it into a release. So again, just making sure that like when you reach an error, we're giving you an explanation, we're helping you. So lots of cool stuff happening there. From the roadmap, if you're not familiar, angular.io/roadmap or /guides/roadmap is the way to know what the team's working on. This was done to make sure that we were sharing with the community what our team is spending every day, all day thinking about and working on. And I can tell you that it's completely true. It's basically a one-to-one map of like the cool V13 features are from the roadmap. So like I said, we're removing the IE11 support, ES 2017, improved test times and debugging, new guides. Again, if you go to that roadmap and you say, I wonder what's in version 13, it is a very, very big spoiler. So if you're ever interested in what's coming, and in the future section, there's also some really great stuff. And so with all of that said, I just want to ask or inspire you that hopefully this talk has given you reason to NG update. And thank you so much for being a part of the community. Please know that whatever you're doing in that community section of what it means to be in the community, we are so thankful for you. And if you're interested in doing a new thing in the community, feel free to reach out. Our team is always interested in supporting and helping you. And so thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Emma. I'll go contribute some more now after your talk. I know it was very inspiring. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'm very excited about all the new features.
Yes, V13.
Yeah.
The RC is coming soon, people.
So now up next we have Deborah.
Can you share my screen?
Yes, but I don't see you sharing it yet. Also, Emma, there's some questions in the chat if you want to answer them.
Oh, sure, of course. I thought we would do the Q&A in the end. Of course.
Oh,
let's
no,
do
I mean-
questions first.
Yeah, I mean, either way, but Deborah, if you
Yeah,
share your screen, I'll share it.
And let's do Q&A now. I guess it's
Okay.
better. So we have a question from Aris. Emma, is there a schematic that can enable strict mode in an existing Angular app? Oh, you're on mute, Emma, sorry.
Oops. Yes. I'll say it again. My bad. Yes, there is a schematic. I don't know it off the top of my head. Maybe someone else here does, but I can share it in the chat. Yeah, so as you update, strict mode will not be enabled by default, because if you have like a giant application, you update to a new version and strict mode is enabled, like that can be scary. So it's like a soft enabling, but yeah, I can share that in the chat. Make a note.
We also have another question from Sergio. Are there any plans for reducing boilerplate code in Angular?
Yeah, so I think this is sort of touching on like the idea of the fact that when you run like ng new component, there's going to be like 4 files created. There are flags if you're interested in going the single file component structure. There's some really great talks on the pros and cons of that. I will say that we're also very much, if you look at the future section of the roadmap, there are a lot of conversations and projects in there thinking about things like removing zones, removing modules is a big one, or making modules optional. And so there's a lot of conversations about how Ivy has enabled those things. And you should see pretty soon some RFCs coming out for things the team is thinking about in that space. I will say that removing boilerplate is not the goal with any of that. We actually feel that it's nice that when you go into a new application, you can know what's going on there. Angular is very much targeting enterprises for that reason. Maybe Deborah will talk a little bit about that in some way, but yeah, you'll see some stuff of maybe in that space.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Some Angular boilerplate is, I think, is beneficial in some cases, or in most cases. I do have a question as well. Actually, my manager told me to ask that question. And maybe it's a bit loaded, I'm not sure. He told me, what about partial rehydration support in Angular? If it's in the plans, like okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So rehydration support. So the team, I didn't talk about this, but our team has partnered pretty closely with Chrome in the last year, especially as Chrome has rolled out Chrome Web Vitals, Core Web Vitals, what the C stands for. And those are ways of tracking the metrics of how performant your application is on the web. So things like first contentful paint, things like that. So rehydration is a big part of that. And there are some plans for things, because we're very much targeting making sure Angular matches any push with Core Web Vitals to be more performant on the web, that we're meeting those standards and making sure Angular applications meet those standards. So rehydration is part of that for sure.
Okay, great. So thank you very much. I don't see any other questions in the chat. And yes, ciao. The cat is distracting me because I always look at the cat and it's so cute. So let's go to the next talk now by Deborah. Are you ready, Deborah? Yeah, okay.
I am. Okay. All right, I'm going to talk about reactive programming with RxJS. So my name is Deborah Kurata. I'm a Pluralsight author and a developer. And there I am with my spouse in the lovely city of Athens. Really wish we were doing this in person there. I would love to go back again. So I'm going to try to make this interactive just a little bit anyway. And so here's a question for you. X is 5, Y is 3. What is Z? And I know there's about a 6-second delay between the time I'm actually saying these words and the time that you're seeing them. So I'll give you just a little bit of time. And this might seem trivial, but there is a method to my madness here. So if you could just type in the chat what your answer is to this question, that would be helpful for me, because I don't know what 5 plus 3 is. I do have a degree in math, but not algebra, or a degree in math, not in arithmetic. 53. That would only be the case if I put strings around them. Anybody want to give that another try? Thank you, Emma. I appreciate it. All right, so 5 and 3 is 8. So yes, there was a reason for this simple question. Now what is Z? Anybody want to try that one? What is Z at this point? And again, I know there's a little bit of a delay from the time that you all see this. Yes, it is, of course, still 8. And the reason for that is because, as we know, a value is assigned when the expression is first evaluated. That's true in math, and it's also true in computer programming. So Z does not react to changes in X or Y. But what if we want it to react to changes? So say, for example, we have a shopping cart, and this one I took from Target. I don't know, do they have Target in Athens? I don't know. But anyway, this is the Target shopping site. And I picked a Lego space shuttle, and I don't want one because one is never enough. I want 3 of them. So I'm going to pick a quantity of 3. And what I want is for it to react to that change. I want the price here to change. I want my summary information to change. So I want it to react to changes. I don't want it just to be set one time. So the question for you all is, what techniques could you use to react to changes in the quantity? And again, if you want to use the chat in YouTube to answer that. So here I've got an item, a price, and quantity. Notice that this is just pseudocode, but even my pseudocode has semicolons. I don't know why that is. But anyway, what kind of code would you write in order to get the extended price here to react to changes in the quantity? What kinds of things would you do? Any feedback? Any thoughts? I'll give you a second, because again, I know it's like a 6-second delay. So it's quite a long delay from me saying it to you seeing it. Any ideas? Use Excel? That would work. Yeah, because Excel will auto move your changes. Any other suggestions? A function? Yes, that's great. That would be an option. Any service? An object prototype? Yes. Okay, so I have a couple of options. Yes, Chow, that's exactly the first one I'm going through. One option is like a getter or a function of some kind. Here I have a getter function, and again, this is pseudocode here, so I don't have like thises and stuff, but you get the idea here that as the quantity is changing, I could have a getter that returns the price and quantity, and Angular's change detection would automatically pick that up. The problem with something like this, though, is if my ordering part of my application and my totaling part of the application is 2 different components, then I don't really have a way to get that other component to be notified of this change. Yes, Brady, another option would be to use on change. So we've got an event as another option. Again, this is pseudocode. I'm using on quantity changed, passing in the new quantity, and it will calculate the new price. So that's another option. But because I'm talking about RxJS, the other option, of course, is an observable. So the whole idea of an observable is to be able to react to changes. And again, this is pseudocode, so this isn't valid code here. But I'm specifying that my quantity is an observable value. It's something that I can watch over time. So it's data we can observe over time. And I'm going to show real syntax here in a moment. So this is, again, just pseudocode here to get the idea that I'm defining an observable of some type. The generic parameter here is specifying the type of item I want to emit. The quantity is a number. And then here I want to start it when the user first picks that they want a space shuttle. I want it to start with a quantity of 1, not a quantity of 0. The second step then is to emit when an action occurs. So on quantity changed, I'm going to emit. And again, this is pseudocode. So this isn't actual observable syntax. But I'm saying, hey, observable, here is a new value, and the observable then can emit that. Then I can react to those emissions. So I can take my extended price and I can react to it by calculating, I can take the quantity rather and react to a change in that quantity by calculating that extended price. I can propagate that change further. So whenever you change, I change. So I can propagate that. Here's the code we just looked at for the extended price. I can take that extended price and propagate the change further to calculate the tax. Up by us, it's 10.75%, or it was when I did the screenshot. Now I think it's 10.25. But anyway, I can also calculate the delivery fee for Target. If it's less than $35, then it's $5.99. Otherwise, it's free. So I can propagate that change throughout my code. I can also compose streams. And again, this is pseudocode. We'll look at real code here in a minute. I'm taking the total price and I'm combining, or I'm taking the extended price, delivery fee, and tax. I'm combining all of them in order to define a total price. So anytime any of these three change, the total price will change and it will add them together. Subscribers are then notified. So instead of having to have these two components tightly coupled so that the total component knows when the other component has changed, instead they can independently subscribe to the observable and independently receive notifications. So my components do not have to be closely tied together. Hey, the value changed, and they both can then update their user interface. All right, so what we're talking about is two different kinds of programming paradigms. Imperative programming, where 5 + 3 is 8. It doesn't matter what you do to X afterwards. The original value is assigned when the expression is first evaluated. And reactive programming, where it's going to react to future changes. Now, the $sign doesn't really have any syntactical significance. It just is for us as developers to realize that the Z over here is different from the Z over here, that it is more of a reactive, observable kind of Z that will react to changes, and we can observe those changes. So that brings us to the question, what is reactive programming? It's basically a declarative programming paradigm concerned with data streams and the propagation of change. This is from Wikipedia. So you can see everything we've been talking about is reactive programming. So then your question might be, okay, this looks really cool. How do I get, what are some other benefits of reactive programming? Well, first of all, as we saw, we can react to user actions. User changes the quantity, we can react to that. We can compose streams, so we can define a total that's comprised of several different things. We can communicate between components, so the components don't need to talk to each other. Rather, they can both subscribe to the same observables and automatically adjust themselves without having to be tightly coupled. We can also manage application state. We're not going to talk about that one too much in this session. I only have about 20 minutes, so we're going to focus on the first three here. So if this is all nice and cool, I really would like to do reactive programming. Where do I get this magical observable thing? We get it through reactive extensions. Reactive extensions are an implementation of the reactive programming principles. They are a library for composing these observable data streams. They were actually originally developed by Microsoft as Rx.net. Microsoft hasn't really been doing too much with that, but they are coming out with a new implementation of reactive extension called Reactor. So if you're into .NET also, that might be something you want to check out. There's also implementations of RxJS for Java and Python and Ruby. But the one, of course, we're interested in as Angular developers is RxJS, reactive extensions for JavaScript. This is used in Angular, React, Vue, JavaScript, TypeScript. So it's not just an Angular thing. There is also some talk about making an observable part of ECMAScript, so it would actually become a real thing in JavaScript directly. And if you're interested in information on that, I've got the link below. So what is an observable exactly? Well, kind of like an array, you can think of it as a collection, but it's a collection of items over time. So unlike an array, it doesn't actually retain those items. Emitted items can only be observed over time unless your code is actually going to collect those and do something with them. So I might have an array that looks like this. The observable would look like this. There's one, there's another one. So imagine that I was actually able to come to this user group and we're there in person and I bring cookies and I hand out and I emit these cookies to all of the people that are there. After I've done that, I go, oh, wait a minute, I forgot to put the frosting on them. And can I have them back? And most of the people in the audience would be like, sorry, too late. Because once they've been emitted, you no longer really control them unless you are actually going to maintain that list. All right, so Angular creates observables for us. Routing emits parameters via a param map observable. Form control emits via a value changes observable. HTTP client emits the response via an observable. So that's probably the one you have seen most commonly. You'll have an HTTP response, something like this. So I've got a get products method that's issuing an HTTP get. It's going to return data from this HTTP get. It's going to map that response into an array of items that match this product interface, and it's going to return that observable. So we were talking about using this to react to, in order to have it react to changes that we want to control. So how do we emit into this observable? The answer is we don't. We cannot emit into any observables that Angular creates. If we want to emit changes, like that quantity has changed and we want to emit it so that everyone knows, all the other components know that that quantity has changed, we cannot use any of these observables that Angular is giving us. We have to create our own. And we create our own using any number of things, but primarily a subject or behavior subject. Now, there are other options, but we're going to focus on these two. To declare an observable and emit items over time, use a subject or behavior subject. Okay, so what are these? These are a special type of observable that are similar to event emitters. We use one to explicitly emit notifications. We can emit next, telling it, hey, this is the next item that I want to go into the stream. We can actually emit an error notification or a complete notification. Consumers can subscribe to receive those notifications. Yes, I opted not to talk about the iterator and subscriber pattern because that would require more time than my 20 minutes that I have. And I wanted to make this approachable for those not familiar with those patterns. Okay, speaking of patterns though, we do have a standard pattern that we use for declaring our subject, and it's a 2-line pattern. Why? Well, first of all, we are specifying this code often in a service. And what I did, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I color coded these. So this is purple. Purple is a service. So in my service, I am declaring my subject and I am making it private because I am going to emit into it. And I don't want any other code in the application, any other component, any other service to be able to emit into this stream. I want to control it. I don't want something else emitting an error or completing the stream, or I want to control my subject. So I'm making it private. However, I want other code in the application to be able to subscribe and get notifications and react to those changes. So I am making the observable, the read-only part of that subject, a public property. So that's my quantity. And again, the dollar is only a visual thing for us as readers of the code. It doesn't have any significance for the actual syntax. So we're doing a private, creating a new subject. Again, our generic parameter is defining the type of data. Our quantity is a number, so that's what we're specifying. And then here is our read-only. Now, if we were going to do a behavior subject instead, the syntax for that is very similar, only we have a default. So the primary difference between using a subject and a behavior subject is that a subject is does not have a default value, and it doesn't provide an initial emission when a subscriber subscribes. So when would you use a behavior subject over a subject? Whenever you need a default value. For example, in our case, when a user picks a product, we want to default to 1. We don't want to default to 0. That doesn't make any sense. I just said I wanted one of those. So it makes sense to default to 1. In other cases, a default might not make any sense. We also want to use a behavior subject when newer subscribers want the current value, because the other key difference about a behavior subject is when any subscriber subscribes, they will get the most recent value. Whereas a subject, they won't get any value until the next time the subject emits something. So in our example, say there's another feature that the user can open up and view more information about the tax, or another feature that they can open up and pick some additional things for calculating the delivery fee. You want that new component that's opening up to get that current value. So you would want a behavior subject. The last reason on my list for using a behavior subject instead is that the observable, when the observable must emit as part of a combination or other operation. And we'll see an example of that in just a minute. Okay, so going back to our code, we've decided we're going to use a behavior subject because we want that default value and we want the other components to get a value on subscription, even if they're subscribing later. We then emit the value. Again, this has to be in the service because my subject is private here. So in my service, I have a method and I'm using next to emit that value. So this tells the subject to emit another value into the stream. So let's walk through our scenario. User selects a quantity. So here I want 3. The UI generates a selection changed event. So, hey, the user changed the quantity to 3. What does that code look like? In my template, I would have something like this. So the change event binding would call on selected in my component. And again, this is green. Green is UI. Blue is component. So in my component, I have this on selected. Now the on selected here cannot emit into the stream because my subject is private in my service. It instead calls the service quantity changed method. All right, so code responding to the changed event then emits the new quantity into the observable stream. So here the code then says, okay, I've been notified of the change, so I'm going to emit 3 into the stream. So this is my component. Again, this is blue. This is the code we were just looking at. It calls quantity changed in the service. So here again is my service. That's the subject, and my quantity changed, which calls next. So the component is calling the service to emit the value into the stream. The code then reacts to emissions and propagates the change. So the code's like, I'll react and propagate this change to any other code that needs it. So here's my extended price, the tax, delivery fee, and total price. Now this is actual code, so this is combined latest. It's got all the extra parentheses and parens that you need to make this code work, and all the thises and stuff that makes this actual valid syntax. Now, when the quantity changes, it will automatically recalculate the extended price. When the extended price changes and emits a new value, it will automatically calculate this new tax and emit that. When any of these change, it will recalculate the total price and calculate that. Lastly, any UI or code subscribed to the observable receives a notification and the admitted value from each of these observables. So the subscriber receives those change notifications. It can update its quantity here and the total. All right, so I have a little Stack Blitz demo right here. And I'll show that link again in just a minute. So here, let's just reload that. And I didn't redo the entire UI. I just did a little bit of it here. So this quantity is available for me to change. And as I change it, it immediately changes my subtotal and everything here. So this is my service. If I changed from a behavior subject to a subject, so if I change that to a subject, I can no longer give it a default, and notice what happens. Now when this comes up, it doesn't have an initial emission, so it's not able to propagate the change through all of the other observables. So in this case, I do want a behavior subject. And then it works fine here. All right. So some key points here. Use reactive programming, RxJS approach. Using an RxJS approach can make your application more reactive, hence the name. We declare an observable stream, frequently in a service. We emit into the stream on an action, click events, variable changes, operation notifications, and so on. And we react when a value is emitted into the stream in order to have other code notified when this is changed. Any UI or other code subscribes to the observable to be notified of any emissions. And with that, I want to thank you very much. That's my daughter and I overlooking the beautiful city of Athens. You can see the Mediterranean here off in the background. Gosh, I wish I was anywhere but in my home right at this moment. Here are the links for both my Twitter and for that Stack Blitz. And I also have some YouTube videos on RxJS that you can access that way. And I can look at any questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Deborah. Do you want me to call out the questions for you?
Sure, if we wanted to do the questions right away, that's fine.
Yeah, perfect. So thank you very much. That was a great talk. And I really like the little Greek touches with the pictures and the Greek letters. Apart from the amazing content, of course.
Oh, thank you.
So Aris is asking, Deborah, what would be the best approach to get notified when the property of an input binding changes and propagate the notification to a service?
Well, there are two ways. You can either do it with a setter or with ng on changes. So either way would work. Every time that the value is set, you could update the service or use the built-in ng on changes event and do it that way. I'm hoping that's what you were asking.
Let's see if Aris answers in the questions, but the comments. But let's see Zoran's question. Can you please relate Rx design to degrees of freedom, specifically in designing phase and selecting root variables that drive everything else downstream?
Degrees of freedom, specifically in designing phase and selecting root variables that drive everything else downstream. I'm not sure I completely understand the question, the designing phase. I don't think that I understand the question. Does someone else? I'm not familiar with.
Aris says, regarding his question, I was referring to the property of the object, not the object
Oh,
itself.
not the object itself.
Supposing
Yes.
that the input binding is properties.
Let's see. One of the ways that I've done it is to specifically treat that particular property as a separate property of the component in addition to being a property of the object. So that's one way that I have done it. The other thing that I've done is to use something like NGRX, which is quite a heavy solution, but it does give you much finer control to be able to respond in the NGRX store to the actual individual properties that are changing and to do state change notifications that way. So if you have a lot of that, you might want to consider an NGRX kind of solution that is better able to suit that. Hopefully that was a better answer. And I'm still stuck on design phase. One of the things that I try to do, and I don't know if this is related to Zoran's question, but one of the things that I found when I first was doing RxJS, I thought it was really cool to write these really huge, 8-10 line pipe statements with all this stuff in it, and hey, aren't I cool, and look at how many I could put into one statement. And since then I have learned that that's not necessarily the smartest thing, and to break them into much smaller units. Not only are they easier to test, they're easier to reuse, they're easier to put in the error handling and then combine them. So if you noticed in the ones that we did, they were all each little small pieces. And so from a design perspective, you would think of each of those as discrete units. Degrees of freedom from control theory, where a subset of variables is driving the rest of them. I believe there's a lack of stress on backing theory causing design flaws. Well, that might be something that I would need to look into because I'm not familiar enough with control theory to respond. Thanks for the effort. To respond intelligently. So maybe that's something we can pick up and talk more about on Slack or on Twitter, because I would be very interested in ensuring that this doesn't lead to design flaws, because that would not be a good thing. Were there any more questions?
I don't think so.
Combine latest is not deprecated, so you can use combine latest. The important thing is that you want to, as Chow said, to import from RxJS operators if you're using RxJS 6 or older, and not the other one. And you also need to make sure you get all of the syntax in there. Combine latest requires square brackets around its list of elements. So if you just do combine latest parent and start putting stuff in, it's going to tell you that it's not correct. So you need the square brackets in there. I can go back to that slide real quick. Whoops, I had it and then I lost it. So you have to have these square brackets in there to give it an array, and then that is not deprecated. The actual oops, that's gonna, oh, that's right. Okay. The actual stack blitz that I did is, shows it using, I believe it's RxJS 7. If not, I will change it to it. Yes, somebody asked, is it moved? It's moved to RxJS. Actually, everything as of RxJS 7, everything now is just in RxJS. There is no RxJS/operators. Okay, I think that's it. I want to thank you for listening to my talk.
Perfect. Thank you very, very much, Deborah. So now, Tracy.
Yes, excited to be presenting. Those were both amazing talks. I love them both. Let me go ahead and share my screen really quickly. Cool. So today I'm going to talk about contributing to open source. I'll just figure out how to size my screen in a way that's good. Okay. All right. So, yeah, nice to see everybody. Love Angular, as everybody says. So, man, when the world opens back up, I feel like everyone's going to be flying over to Athens to hang out. So I wanted to talk a little bit about contributing to open source, especially, Angular and, other things like NGRX, RxJS, etc. I get this question a lot. How do I contribute to open source? How do I get involved? And, it's actually not that difficult, surprisingly. There's so many different ways to do so. Contributing to open source is actually pretty easy. All you have to do is dip your toe in. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Basically, just a simple quick start guide on how to be able to do so. My name is Tracy. You can find me on Twitter at LadyLeet. And yes, Chow, Hacktoberfest is right around the corner. So definitely check that out, especially because you get a free shirt, which is obviously like the best thing about Hacktoberfest. I'm the CEO of a company called This.Labs. We're a 50% consultancy. I love it here, to be honest. And I love the JavaScript community. So I'm also on the RxJS core team. Thank you, Deborah, for doing such an amazing talk on reactive programming and everything with RxJS. I'm also a Google Developer Expert for Angular, a Microsoft MVP, and I just love doing community-related things. So always happy to chat. You can always find me on Twitter at LadyLeet. If you're not on Twitter, definitely get one. So back to my day job really quickly. It's pretty cool. We get to work on some amazing projects, whether it be Twilio, Google, Roblox, Wikimedia, T-Mobile, et cetera, et cetera. So if you are excited about working with on really cool projects, definitely come hang out with me, especially if you love Angular. I mean, if you didn't love Angular, I don't know why you'd be here. But we also do a lot of other technologies, and this is how I make new friends. So email me, Tracy at this dot. I love talking to new developers, and I would absolutely love to hear from you. So contributing to open source, we're going to talk through a few things today. First, I'm going to talk about my journey, hopefully to make it less scary for you. Then we'll talk about you and, hey, why? Why do you want to contribute to open source? We'll talk about how as well, and then we'll talk about some do's and don'ts. So my journey, basically I started going to boot camp. I really loved it. I met the JavaScript community. I started getting involved. And then, of course, now I'm on the RxJS core team and a GDE and an MVP and things like that. So what's the first thing I did? I joined the community. So again, like I said, Twitter is an amazing place. You can follow all of us on Twitter, Katerina, Emma, myself, and Deborah, and just start talking to people, right? There's also Angular Athens, of course, like Katerina mentioned, and amazing organizers. And those are the types of people you want to kind of get to know and see what they're doing and what opportunities might come about. Katerina also mentioned there's great ways to speak too. So if you're learning Angular or you're solving a hard problem, or even if you just want to talk about your passion for it, like definitely reach out to Angular Athens to speak here. So that kind of goes into what you do next, which is basically sharing and educating, right? I started sharing about my experience of learning Angular and just talking through it, blogging about my journey, everything I learned, and helping the people I saw on the internet, right? As much as I could. And again, even as a beginner, I was able to give back in my own way. The third thing I did was meet maintainers and, generally people, right? And again, this goes to, hanging out with us on Twitter, coming and saying hi. Meetups, you're here at a meetup. So that's the first step, developing relationships. So, now I know that Chow is awesome. And I'm like, man, if I see Chow at a conference, I'm going to be like, hey, Chow, I remember from you from Angular Athens, right? Same with Sergio. So meet maintainers, just be nice, friendly, and helpful, and the rest will come. And, the last thing, obviously, is contributing. So while I was still doing a lot for the community, I kept a lookout on what was needed. And I was really good friends with the RxJS core team, and they really needed help with the documentation, and they just couldn't, it was a few months. And I said, you know what, I think I can help with this. So I started, because I was already speaking at Angular conferences, I started asking people, saying, hey, we're starting a RxJS docs team. If you want to get involved, get involved. I set up a repo and said, hey, here we go. Let's go. Let's start doing the documentation. And soon, all of a sudden the docs were written, and it was great. So, you just focus on your strengths and what you can do and look for opportunities. And again, this goes to just listening to what people are talking about on Twitter and things like that. But shortly thereafter, then I was, they asked me to become part of the RxJS core team. So that was fun and that was great. But obviously, like if you start contributing, don't expect to all of a sudden become part of the core team. That's not the point. The point is open source is awesome and we're using free software. So be helpful and contribute. And hopefully at some point in time, you'll be rewarded. Like, for example, if you love Angular and you're working on the or you're looking at the documentation and you find opportunities to contribute to the documentation, there's probably opportunities to become a GDE, right? Again, not immediately. You have to kind of show that you're going to be here for a while. But through that type of work, it's a great journey into open source. So let's talk about you. And yes, I'm going to say your name wrong, but it's Aristides, I think. Angular is one of the most welcoming open source projects for starting to contribute. And I totally agree with that. So thinking about why you want to do this, right? The first question you want to say is, why am I doing this? Is it functional or is it aspirational? So functional kind of means, hey, I am at work and my team is using Angular or RxJS or something. And I know I'm going to need to know people in open source or in these projects so that I can fix the issues that I might run into at work. Aspirational is, hey, I love this. I love the community. I want to build a career. I want to get a new job. I want to increase my knowledge within a technology, right? That's aspirational. So how you approach these two are a little bit different. So functional, I will definitely say if you're planning on being involved in the Angular community because you have to, right? Approach it not as, hey, give me what I need, but the first thing to do is give before you ask. So if you're thinking, hey, I'm going to need this for work, just start getting involved, right? Your life will be so much easier if you're already a contributor to that community and, you're looking to fix your work or need questions about the roadmap or whatever, right? Always try to do a little bit before you have to ask for something, right? The second thing is submit an issue first before you actually try to make a change or something like that. Ask for feedback. Whether that's a big change or a small change, always make sure to ask for feedback first. Do this by submitting an issue and then find a maintainer to champion your issue, right? Maintainers are really busy, but it's so much easier. They'll probably respond if, again, they know you're doing good work. Like, for example, if I was on the Angular core team and, Chow, now that I know you from this meetup, you said, hey, Tracy, I have this small change that I want to make to the documentation. I'll say, oh, I know you. Yeah, sure. I'll take some time and help you out a little bit, right? Because, there's already some level of familiarity there. So it goes a long way, again, to just hang out again, get to know people, and then get people to help, right? Another great example is, somebody was, trying to contribute to RxJS and they were trying to actually submit a fix, and that issue sat around for a while. But one of my friends said, hey, my friend submitted this issue. Can somebody look at it? And I said, oh yeah, sure. And then, within a few days, the bug was fixed and submitted. So, you fast track your way versus an issue sitting there or a PR sitting there for months and months and months. Also, the reason to submit an issue is because you might really, really want something. Maybe it's a feature, maybe it's something else, right? But the core team has probably already talked about it and maybe decided against making this change. So you don't want to waste all your time doing all this work if this PR isn't going to be merged, right? There's just a lot under the surface you might be unaware of. For example, if you want to reduce the boilerplate, maybe don't submit a PR and delete all the boilerplate. Maybe there's a reason there's a boilerplate is there, right? The third thing is finding people in other forums to chat, right? Build relationships, reach out to maintainers on Twitter, email them if you need a response. GitHub notifications and issues are very noisy. But if you say, if you reached out to me and said, Tracy, oh man, I loved your talk at Angular Athens. There's this issue in RxJS. Do you know when it's going to be fixed? I'll probably respond to you, via email. I'm definitely not looking at my GitHub notifications. So finding and building relationships in other forums, again, people are busy. I'm busy. I can't respond to everybody, but, just know that it's a lot easier if you just hang out. The fourth thing is building genuine relationships, right? Nobody likes to be used, right? If I went to Katerina and I was just like, hey, Katerina, you're so nice. And then 5 minutes later, I ask her to buy me dinner. She's going to be like, well, were you just using me because you wanted dinner? It's the same thing with, getting help from maintainers or, needing something to be fixed, right? Make sure those relationships are genuine and you're not just doing something to self-serve yourself, because nobody likes those types of relationships, and it's not a good reputation to build for yourself within the community. So if you are aspirational, for example, if you have aspirational goals of, I'm going to get into open source because this is going to be my career, right? This is amazing because you don't have to be tied to a technology that your company is using. You can do whatever you want. So I would highly recommend looking at a repo and saying, do I like this project? Do I like these people? Are there issues I can tackle? Is there some way I can be useful already within a project that, maybe it's the documentation or something else? So do that. There's so many different types of people, different types of teams, how they approach things. Angular, Vue, and React are very different communities, and each project within those communities are run very differently. So it really is great if you can kind of poke around and, see who those people are first. Because you might end up not liking somebody, and that's okay too, right? You don't want to start investing your career and being like, wow, I really hate the people I work with, even if it's open source. Second thing kind of is this, same thing as I said before, is solve problems maintainers want, right? Again, you might think that Angular shouldn't be using TypeScript. And, well, that's probably not a problem that the maintainers want you to solve, because they're probably going to be using TypeScript for a while. So make sure you're solving problems that maintainers want. Ben Lesh, creator of RxJS, we were talking one day and he's like, what would be really helpful? Do the things in your job, your day job, that you really actually don't like to do. Because I'll bet you all the people working in open source, they're just trying to get their job done. And if you can help with that, that is helpful. For example, code reviews. Anybody can do a code review. You do not need to be a senior developer to do a code review. Help code review, right? Helping produce documentation for bugs that somebody might have submitted that didn't have documentation to reproduce it, right? Do something like that. Or documentation. Do you love writing documentation? I can tell you a lot of people don't like writing documentation. So that's always something that, maintainers want. So solve problems that maintainers want. And again, you can look at this by, looking at the different issues. Third, I've talked about the docs a little bit, but I will tell you that you ask any maintainer of any project and they will say, well, we can always use help with the docs. So if you are using the documentation actively, you will find holes. You absolutely will, whether it's live examples, wording, better explanations. Go ahead and help. Like, for example, I was messing around in the Node.js repo the other day, and I found some inconsistencies to the definition of the technical steering committee, which is their core team. So there's two definitions in two different places. And I said, I should just submit a PR and reconcile these differences, right? Not a big change, but, helpful generally, right? So those are the types of things that, again, the users of the documentation are going to have the most information on, which is you. And yes, open source is not just about creating PRs. Absolutely. Which is my fourth point, educate and share, right? You don't have to be, the person who wrote NGRX to be important in open source or make a career for yourself in open source. I love using Deborah as an example because she has done so much education within the community, and a lot of you all know her, for example. And, it's not because she wrote NGRX, for example, it's because she is an amazing educator. And, that's her contribution to open source, So just start sharing about your experience, write about why you love something, how you used a certain feature, what are the upcoming features, issues you ran into. You can take Emma's talk and just be like, hey, here's a summary of what Emma shared. That's incredibly useful. People need more information, not less information, and told by different people because everybody learns in a different way. So keep educating, keep sharing, yes. And doing and writing unit tests, great example, right? So I just want to talk about the do's and don'ts first, not first, last. Make sure you have compassion. Maintainers are usually doing work for free on nights and weekends. So just know that when you ask them for things, right? Treat maintainers like people. Remember that they're just as human as you are. They can only handle so many things at one time. And if you treat them badly, they're not going to care to help you. Also, make sure to be professional. You might not be working or getting paid to work with these people, but we do expect you to be professional. And if you're not professional, people aren't going to want to work with you, right? So make sure you treat open source relationships good. Also, obviously, there's codes of conduct and things like that. Assuming the best intentions. Going into a project and saying, what is this trash here? This is terrible. Why is this operator like in RxJS called, or subject called replay subject? This is the most terrible name. Submitting an issue for that is obviously not going to be helpful. It was probably named that for a reason, right? So assume the best of intentions, or, for example, an example here was the boilerplate. Why? If you go in and saying, this is the worst project ever, this is too much boilerplate, like, there's probably a reason it was there. Now, again, not to say whether it should be like a lot or a little, et cetera, but again, assume the best of intentions. Open source is often tireless and a thankless job to keep everyone happy. So just be nice. Also, code of conduct. Make sure you're abiding by a code of conduct and generally just being nice to each other. Now for the don'ts, definitely don't act entitled. Be nice, be patient. Don't assume your maintainer's biggest priority. Like, for example, most people have a full-time job, and then they have a full-time job in open source. And then they probably have kids or something, or cats, right? Imagine having to juggle a million things like that. Like, sometimes open source is just not a maintainer's biggest priority, and sometimes your issue is just not the biggest priority. It's just the way it is. Don't be annoying. Follow up, but do not email about an issue 10 times a day. Follow up, but follow up within reason. Also, don't complain, right? Everyone's trying their best. You're using free software. If you don't like it, maybe you should go somewhere else. But no, I mean, really, like, don't complain. Try to approach people with kindness, and that will get you much further than not. So I hope this helped. I mean, I know it was a short talk, but hopefully it helped you understand, how easy it is to actually get into open source. Hopefully it inspires you all to also get into open source. And hopefully it gives you some foundation as to, how to interact within the community so that you can be successful as well. And the Angular community, again, is like one of the most welcoming, amazing communities ever. You guys are so lucky to be in this community and always looking for new contributors. So highly, highly recommend you just get started. Everybody's here is willing to help. So again, I'm always looking for new friends. We're 100% fully remote and worldwide. So if you want to come work with us, send me an email, come hang out. And that is it for my talk. Thank you.
Perfect, Tracy. I really like your talk.
Thank you.
And I really, really like the part of your talk about people that you have to be nice and not complain, or just generally be kind and all that, because not all people are. Even in meetups or in events, some people can be rude, or some people, And
you remember it. You remember it.
I remember it. Sorry for anyone that's watching who has not been kind to me. I remember. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm a kind person, really.
You are, yes.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And I really like how you showed all the span that somebody can contribute or be a community member, or just a whole wide range of things that somebody can do to actually help and give back. And even Emma talked about that in her talk. Like, it's not only about like actually writing lines of code. It's so many things that you can do. So thank you very much for that.
Absolutely.
So, I don't know what else we can say. I don't see any questions in the chat. Thank you very, very much. And thank you very much to the organizers of the Angular World Tour who paid a visit to Greece and to Athens. And we really hope to see you in person someday. And thank you for the amazing talks. The video is recorded already and is available in the link that you're watching now. Is that right? I think yes. Yeah. So anyone who joined in now, they can watch the video and it will be there and we will tweet about it. And thank you very, very much, everyone, again. And we hope to see you in our next Angular Athens event. Bye.